there's a hidden danger beneath Puerto Rico. The Atlantic Ocean can break any day now, and millions have no idea what's coming. Picture the deepest, darkest pit in the Atlantic Ocean, 5 miles down, where two massive pieces of Earth's crust are locked in a deadly wrestling match. The Puerto Rico Trench isn't just a hole in the ocean floor. It's a ticking time bomb that's already exploded 4 times in the past 250 years, each blast more devastating than the last. In 1918, a magnitude 7.3 quake triggered a tsunami that killed over 100 people and flattened entire coastal towns in minutes. But here's what keeps scientists awake at night. Recent seismic data shows the trench is building towards something much bigger, a magnitude 8.0 or greater megaquake that could dwarf anything in recorded history. The terrifying part? When it hits, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands will have less than 15 minutes before a wall of water slams into their shores. Are we watching the final countdown to the Atlantic's most catastrophic disaster? And is anyone truly prepared for what's coming? 5 miles beneath the Caribbean's turquoise surface, two titans wage an ancient war. The North American Plate, a colossal slab of rock stretching from Greenland to Mexico, grinds relentlessly against the Caribbean Plate in a collision so violent it defies imagination. This isn't the gentle drift of continents. This is geological warfare, played out in slow motion over millions of years. The Puerto Rico Trench marks their battlefield, a scar carved deep into the ocean floor where neither plate will surrender. The North American Plate, heavier and denser, tries to dive beneath the Caribbean, but the Caribbean fights back, buckling and twisting under the immense pressure. Every inch of movement takes decades, but the forces involved could power entire cities. Picture two freight trains colliding at full speed, but stretched across geological time. The energy builds and builds, locked in place by friction and the sheer weight of rock. Temperature and pressure at the collision zone reach levels that would vaporize steel instantly. Yet somehow, the plates hold their deadly embrace, storing energy like a compressed spring. This grinding, inexorable battle creates the very foundation of the Caribbean's beauty and its terror. Every sunset, every coral reef, every gentle wave exists above a violence that could reshape the entire region in minutes. What makes the Puerto Rico Trench truly terrifying isn't just its depth, it's the way it moves. Unlike the predictable subduction zones along the Pacific Ring of Fire, this underwater monster follows its own twisted rules. Scientists call it oblique subduction, a geological nightmare where plates don't just collide head-on, but slide past each other at bizarre angles. Imagine trying to force two massive puzzle pieces together, but they're cut wrong, grinding and catching at every edge. The North American Plate doesn't dive cleanly beneath the Caribbean. It scrapes and tears, creating a chaotic mix of compression and sideways motion that makes prediction nearly impossible. This hybrid movement spawns multiple types of earthquakes simultaneously. Deep thrust faults where one plate tries to override the other. Strike-slip faults where sections slide horizontally like massive scissors. Transform boundaries that twist and buckle under impossible stress. Each type releases energy differently, creating seismic signatures that confuse even the most sophisticated monitoring equipment. The unpredictability is what haunts seismologists. In places like Japan or Chile, subduction follows patterns refined over centuries of study. But the Puerto Rico Trench writes its own rules, combining multiple fault systems into a geological wildcard that could trigger catastrophe through pathways science is still struggling to understand. Long before Spanish conquistadors set foot on Caribbean shores, the Puerto Rico Trench was already writing its violent history in stone and sediment. Indigenous Taíno peoples passed down stories of great shakings and angry seas, oral traditions that modern science now recognizes as accurate accounts of prehistoric megaquakes. Geological evidence carved into coral terraces and buried in ocean sediments reveals a pattern stretching back thousands of years. Layers of tsunami deposits, each marking a moment when the sea turned destroyer, lie stacked like pages in Earth's most terrifying book. Carbon dating shows these catastrophic events recurring roughly every 300 to 800 years, a geological heartbeat that has pulsed through human history. Ancient coral reefs, now lifted high above sea level, bear witness to sudden vertical movements of 10 feet or more in single events. Underwater landslide scars stretch for miles across the ocean floor, evidence of submarine avalanches triggered by massive shaking. Each scar tells the same story. When the trench releases its accumulated stress, the results reshape the entire region. The most chilling discovery came from deep-sea drilling cores. Scientists found evidence of turbidites, underwater avalanche deposits, that suggest prehistoric earthquakes far more powerful than anything in recorded history. The trench's ancient fury makes modern disasters look like gentle tremors by comparison. May 2nd, 1787. The first recorded megaquake to strike the Puerto Rico Trench announced itself with a violence that shattered the colonial world. Churches crumbled across the island as the magnitude 8.1 monster sent shockwaves racing through bedrock at 4 miles per second. But the earthquake was only the beginning. Within minutes, the sea began its deadly retreat, exposing coral reefs and stranded fish across miles of suddenly naked ocean floor. Then came the wall of water, a tsunami that rose 20 feet above normal high tide, smashing into coastal settlements with the force of liquid mountains. Entire villages vanished. Ships were carried miles inland, their broken hulls scattered like toys across flooded valleys. 80 years later, on November 18, 1867, the trench struck again. This time, the magnitude 7.5 quake triggered landslides that buried entire neighborhoods under tons of rock and mud. The tsunami that followed reached heights of 23 feet in some areas, rewriting coastlines and erasing centuries of human settlement. But it was December 28, 1918, that carved the deepest scar in Caribbean memory. The magnitude 7.3 earthquake lasted only 40 seconds, but its tsunami killed 116 people and left thousands homeless. Coastal towns like Aguadilla were obliterated, their ruins scattered across beaches that had been safe harbors just hours before. Between the great disasters, the Puerto Rico Trench sleeps, but it's the sleep of a predator, not peace. Decades pass in apparent tranquility, lulling each new generation into believing the stories of their grandparents were exaggerated, that modern engineering and early warning systems have somehow tamed the beast beneath the waves. This quiet is geology's cruelest deception. While families build homes on coastal plains and tourists flock to beachfront resorts, the trench continues its relentless work. Tectonic plates grind against each other in darkness, accumulating stress grain by grain, fault line by fault line. The longer the silence, the more violent the eventual awakening. Scientists call it the seismic gap, periods of apparent calm that actually signal mounting danger. Like a bow being drawn tighter and tighter, the energy builds in places human eyes cannot see. Deep beneath the ocean floor, rock formations bend and compress beyond their breaking point, storing enough potential energy to power entire cities for years. The 21st century brought subtle but ominous changes to the Puerto Rico Trench's behavior. Starting in 2014, seismic monitoring stations began detecting a new pattern. Not the dramatic jolts that make headlines, but a steady increase in background tremors, like a sleeping giant beginning to stir. These weren't the random micro-earthquakes that occur naturally in any active region. Instead, they followed disturbing patterns. Clusters of small quakes that seemed to migrate along fault lines, each swarm slightly stronger than the last. Magnitude 3.0 and 4.0 events that once occurred monthly began happening weekly, then daily. By 2020, the Puerto Rico seismic network was recording over 20,000 earthquakes per year, a tenfold increase from historical averages. Most were too small for residents to feel, but their cumulative message was clear. Something fundamental was changing in the deep structure of the trench. The most alarming development came from GPS monitoring stations scattered across the Caribbean. These precision instruments, capable of detecting movements smaller than a fingernail's growth, showed the islands themselves were shifting. Puerto Rico was moving northeast at nearly an inch per year, imperceptible to human senses, but geologically explosive. Scientists studying the data recognized the signature, the same gradual acceleration that preceded major earthquakes in Chile, Japan, and Alaska. The trench was waking up, and its awakening was following a terrifyingly familiar script. December 28, 2019, exactly 101 years after the deadly 1918 tsunami, the Puerto Rico Trench delivered a chilling anniversary gift. A magnitude 4.7 earthquake struck just south of the island, followed by an ominous silence that lasted exactly 10 days. Then, on January 7, 2020, the real assault began. A magnitude 6.4 monster ripped through southwestern Puerto Rico at 4:24 a.m., collapsing buildings, triggering landslides, and leaving over 1 million people without power. But this wasn't a single event. It was the opening salvo in a relentless campaign of destruction. Over the next 6 months, more than 10,000 aftershocks pummeled the island, some reaching magnitude 5.9. Entire communities fled their homes, sleeping in cars and makeshift camps as their houses cracked and crumbled with each new tremor. The Punta Ventana Natural Arch, a geological landmark that had stood for millennia, collapsed into rubble. Most terrifying was the pattern. Each major quake seemed to unlock new fault segments, spreading the destruction like a geological infection. Scientists watched in horror as their computer models, designed to predict single large events, proved useless against this sustained assault that rewrote the rules of Caribbean seismology. The 2020 earthquake swarm was supposed to be the release valve, the moment when accumulated stress finally found its outlet and the region returned to relative calm. Instead, it marked the beginning of something far more ominous. By 2024, seismic activity had spread beyond Puerto Rico's borders, creating a web of interconnected tremors across the entire Caribbean basin. Jamaica reported unusual earthquake clusters along. The Dominican Republic experienced its strongest quake in decades. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Earthquakes were occurring in a rough line that traced the edges of the Caribbean plate, each cluster slightly stronger and more frequent than historical norms. GPS stations showed the entire region was in motion, with some areas moving several inches per year, a geological sprint that suggested massive forces at work beneath the surface. Most disturbing were the earthquake storms, rapid-fire sequences of moderate quakes that struck without warning, sometimes dozens in a single day. These weren't typical aftershock patterns, but something new, a seismic behavior that existing models couldn't explain. The Caribbean was transforming into a geological powder keg, and every tremor brought it closer to an explosion that could reshape the entire region. Deep beneath the Puerto Rico Trench, in a realm of crushing pressure and searing heat, rock formations are being pushed beyond their breaking point. For decades, perhaps centuries, these ancient stones have bent and compressed under forces that could flatten skyscrapers, storing energy like a colossal spring wound tighter with each passing year. The physics are brutally simple. When rock can no longer withstand the stress, it fails catastrophically. In an instant, fault segments that may stretch for hundreds of miles rupture simultaneously, releasing energy equivalent to thousands of nuclear bombs. The rupture races through bedrock at 7,000 miles per hour, faster than the speed of sound, generating seismic waves that can circle the globe multiple times. But the Puerto Rico Trench adds a terrifying twist to this already devastating process. Its complex geometry, where multiple fault systems intersect at chaotic angles, means a single rupture can trigger a cascade of failures across different fault segments. What begins as one earthquake can instantly become 3, 4, or even 5 separate ruptures, each feeding energy into the next. The result is a super shear earthquake, where the rupture front actually moves faster than the seismic waves it generates. This creates a geological sonic boom that amplifies ground shaking far beyond what traditional earthquake models predict, turning a magnitude 8.0 event into something that behaves like a magnitude 9.0 or greater. When the Puerto Rico Trench finally releases its accumulated fury in a magnitude 8.0 or greater megaquake, the destruction will unfold in phases, each more devastating than the last. The initial rupture will send seismic waves racing outward at 15,000 miles per hour, reaching Puerto Rico's populated centers in less than 30 seconds. Ground acceleration will exceed 1.5 times the force of gravity, strong enough to launch objects into the air and pancake buildings designed to withstand normal earthquakes. Modern skyscrapers in San Juan will sway beyond their design limits, their steel frames screaming under stresses they were never meant to endure. Older structures, including schools, hospitals, and government buildings, will simply disintegrate. The shaking will last between 3 and 5 minutes, an eternity when the Earth itself becomes an enemy. Landslides will cascade down Puerto Rico's mountainous interior, burying highways and cutting off entire communities. The island's power grid, water systems, and telecommunications networks will fail simultaneously, plunging 3.2 million residents into darkness and isolation. But the earthquake will be only the beginning. Within minutes of the initial rupture, a far deadlier threat will begin its race toward shore. A tsunami generated by massive underwater landslides and seafloor displacement. This wall of water, potentially reaching heights of 30 feet or more, will have less than 15 minutes to cross the narrow shelf between the trench and Puerto Rico's vulnerable coastlines. In the immediate aftermath of the rupture, chaos replaces comprehension. The first 10 minutes will determine who lives and who dies, but those crucial moments will unfold in a fog of confusion, terror, and collapsing infrastructure that makes rational response nearly impossible. As survivors struggle to comprehend the earthquake's devastation, a far deadlier threat races toward shore at 400 miles per hour. The tsunami, born from massive seafloor displacement and underwater landslides, begins as an imperceptible rise in the deep ocean, a wave only inches high but carrying the energy of entire mountain ranges. The first warning will be deceptive. The sea will retreat, exposing coral reefs, stranded fish, and the skeletal remains of shipwrecks that have rested on the ocean floor for centuries. Curious onlookers, unaware of the approaching catastrophe, may venture onto the newly exposed seabed, drawn by the surreal sight of an ocean that has seemingly vanished. This eerie calm will last only minutes. As the tsunami approaches the shallow waters surrounding Puerto Rico, physics transforms it from a barely noticeable swell into a liquid mountain. The wave will slow, but grow exponentially taller, its leading edge steepening into a vertical wall of water that towers 20, 30, even 50 feet above normal sea level. The sound will arrive first, a deep rumbling roar like a freight train or jet engine that grows louder with each passing second. Then, the wave itself will appear on the horizon, a dark line that stretches from one end of the visible ocean to the other, advancing with the inexorable certainty of geological time compressed into terrifying minutes. When the tsunami strikes Puerto Rico's coastlines, it will erase centuries of human achievement in minutes. Coastal cities like Ponce, Mayaguez, and Arecibo, home to hundreds of thousands of people, will vanish beneath walls of water that penetrate miles inland, carrying away everything in their path. Homes, schools, hospitals, entire neighborhoods reduced to floating debris. The human cost will be staggering and immediate. Families who survived the initial earthquake will find themselves trapped in a liquid hell, swept away by currents powerful enough to move cars, trucks, and even small buildings. Children will be torn from their parents' arms. Elderly residents in coastal care facilities will have no chance of escape. Emergency responders will become victims themselves as their rescue vehicles are overwhelmed by the advancing flood. In the aftermath, the true scope of the tragedy will emerge slowly, as communication networks remain severed and entire communities simply cease to exist. Search and rescue teams will find empty foundations where thriving neighborhoods once stood, their residents either swept out to sea or buried beneath tons of debris deposited by the retreating waters. The psychological trauma will scar survivors for generations. Those who witness the ocean swallowing their world will carry images that no therapy can fully heal. The sight of familiar places transformed into alien landscapes of mud, wreckage, and loss. The megaquake and tsunami will trigger a cascade of failures that extends far beyond the immediate physical destruction. Puerto Rico's economy, already fragile from decades of debt and political uncertainty, will collapse entirely as critical infrastructure disappears beneath rubble and floodwater. The island's main port facilities, airports, and power generation plants, all located in vulnerable coastal areas, will be destroyed or severely damaged. Without electricity, water treatment plants will fail, leaving millions without access to clean drinking water. Food distribution networks will collapse as highways buckle and bridges fall. Hospitals that survived the initial disaster will be forced to close as backup generators run out of fuel and medical supplies are exhausted. The island will effectively return to pre-industrial conditions overnight. We build our cities on borrowed time, our lives on borrowed ground. The Puerto Rico Trench reminds us that we are temporary guests on a planet that operates by rules far older and more powerful than human civilization. Our skyscrapers and highways, our airports and hospitals, all of it exists at the sufferance of geological forces that could erase centuries of progress in minutes. Yet this vulnerability is also our strength. Knowing that we live on dangerous ground, we can choose to live wisely. We can build structures that bend rather than break, create communities that help rather than abandon each other, and pass down knowledge that might save future generations from repeating the tragedies of the past. The trench will rupture again, not if, but when. The tsunami will come, the ground will shake, and the comfortable illusion of safety will shatter like glass. But between now and then, we have choices to make. We can prepare or ignore, educate or forget, cooperate or compete. In the end, the Puerto Rico Trench is more than a geological hazard. It's a mirror that reflects our relationship with the planet we call home. It asks the fundamental question that every generation must answer. Will we respect the Earth's power, or will we pretend it doesn't exist until the moment it reminds us, with terrible finality, who is really in control?